I've got a couple of slides I just wanted to share by method of introduction to this. And for those who have not met me, one or two of you I have met here already. I'm Mark Hall. I am your facilitator today. I work as the head of sustainable and responsible business for Syngenta in Europe, Africa, Middle East. And I am joined by our rapporteur, who will feed back on the conversation back into the plenary session, Romano De Vivo. So thank you, Romano. And Emmanuel is also here to help us with any technicalities if we get any issues throughout the next 70 minutes. I just wanted to make sure that everybody else knew who was joining and who is in our breakout group. So I've listed that here. And I've also noted that one or two people have to leave slightly earlier. So just we'll bear that in mind and hope that you can make your points before the time you've got to leave. We'll try to create the space for everybody to have a voice. And not hear from one person too much, but recognize that people need to collect their thoughts and speak out when they wish to speak out. So we are tasked with these key questions. So, what can inspire and ignite the interest of all farmers? What are the main barriers to farmers participating, and how do we overcome them? And what are the key next steps that need to be taken to ignite the interest and overcome the barriers? We're trying to unearth the challenges and the barriers that might be hindering transition. Just from my perspective, here, I'll not only am I a Syngenta employee, but I'm also a regenerative ag farmer. So I have a farm in the UK, and I work on the farm part-time. And my wife and I are growing this farm, and we've started it having taken on a long-term lease to farm this in a regenerative way, or as regenerative as we can be at the minute. So we're experiencing some of this as we start this transition into our own farming career as a hobby alongside the day job. So I hope that you know, I will share insights, but I don't intend to sway the conversation, just facilitate the conversation where we can. So those are the key questions we're going to deal with, and I'll come back to those in a minute. If anyone is using social media, then by all means, please use these following hashtags throughout, and feel free to tag us as hosts on the Forum for Ag on LinkedIn and Nestle on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Okay, so back to the main questions. Romano, I know you're going to take some notes as we go through this, and you're going to share those outcomes back to the group, and you may ask for one or two people to repeat the points or just be clear about the points so that we can capture the clear outcomes. We're trying to find as much clarity of outcome and clarity of conclusion here as we possibly can, so that the voice of this group is balanced and equitable, but it's also quite clear in what we mean and what we are trying to conclude from these questions. So I hope that's enough of an introduction. Romano, anything to add from your perspective?
No, I will just ask you perhaps to check a couple of keywords or ideas while we are proceeding, so that I'm absolutely sure that I'm capturing the conversation in the best way possible for our plenary. Thanks.
by all means, step in and stop us as we go through to capture that clarity. So I'm going to open this up. We had a good conversation. And by the way, when anyone wants to speak for the first time, I think it's a good opportunity then, rather than spending the first 20 minutes going around and everybody introducing each other, it's probably a good idea that before you start your point, you quickly introduce yourself and then make the initial point you want to make. And once you've introduced yourself once, you don't need to do it again. So we've heard from Paulo de Castro, and we've heard from Yanis as well, some pretty thought-provoking ideas about integrating well-being, about environmental and social transformation fitting hand in hand, about the future well-being, respecting planetary boundaries and the value of natural capital and accounting for that capital. And we heard that Paulo made a very clear point that we're going to have to do this with farmers and not against farmers. So what can we do to inspire and ignite the interest of farmers to accelerate the adoption of a more sustainable farming system in regenerative agriculture? Who'd like to open with their thoughts? I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all view each other more openly, by the way.
Hi, everyone. Happy to go first. And then also I saw Ivo raising his hand as well.
Yeah.
Ivo, do you want to go first or should I go?
Matus, you go first.
You were first.
Awesome. So if we can keep the slide on for the next 45 seconds, as I would like to share one point on each of those questions, and that will really help me to be structured, Mark. Thank you for that. And then as a way of briefly introducing myself, I am a farmer who's very much with the experience of the farm that I'm coming from, which has transitioned from conventional to regenerative agriculture over the years, actually using CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, as a way of going through that transition without really knowing we are entering something which is now called regenerative agriculture. You know, with that first-hand experience, I'm involved in numerous processes at global and European levels in that field, right? Just because as a farmer, I cannot do that on my own, or like great work that we are doing on the farm is not enough, right? And that includes working with COP26, with the EU Commission, with Pope Francis, and some others, which I will basically like not go into the details, but as a way of introduction, that's me. 1 point each on those 3 questions that we are being asked. Question number 1, my starting point with the answer would be other farmers and other, you know, like real life examples that you can see, touch, ask questions, and have kind of both one-on-one and like, you know, either mass marketing as well or mass communication, but which is rooted not in a scientific study only of some scientists saying, hey, this is wonderful, but actual real life farmer experience. On point number 2 and 3, I guess, because those are connected, or the question 2 and 3, my major barrier that I'm seeing is being stuck in a system which is a certain system, in particular from cash flow perspective and also subsidy perspective, which is also affecting your cash flow situation, and kind of a need to maintain that, right? Meaning like you may well know that you are not in a perfect situation, but because your cash flow is what it is, and you are stuck in a certain situation which is conserved by the subsidies, you cannot really change, or you cannot change that easily. And that leads me to question number 3, which is which are the barriers, right? And my biggest one that I would like to see action on is transitioning away from action-based payments to result-based payments rapidly, but at the same time, which has been mentioned so many times already today, in a way which is not threatening financial sustainability of a farmer, but actually enhancing it, right? Which is a super difficult feast to pull off the ground. I just had a meeting with my Ministry of Agriculture, and like we've been discussing those very topics, and then like, I have to talk with like 5 other ministries to like understand what's the current situation in that space, right? For example, and like, why should I be doing that as a farmer and not like, for example, climate change committee's equivalent for Poland, which by the way does not exist, right? So I'll stop here because I love to talk a lot. So thank you for that opportunity, and over to you, Ivo.
Okay. Just before we go to Ivo, sorry, just put one point of clarity here, Matheus. You say one of the barriers that you feel is that we're trapped in a system that is cash flow restricted and reliant on subsidy. Does that, what I take from that is that farmers are currently unable to generate sufficient cash flow to invest in the capital items that are required to rapidly transition their system, such as this thing over my shoulder, which is very expensive. Is that what you mean by
that? Broadly speaking, yes. I mean, yeah, it's more, my approach there is more, you are basically financing yourself using credit, either the like straightforward credit, you get money from the bank, which is great, very few farmers do that, or you are using loan from a company that is supplying you with inputs without really seeing this as a loan, right? And then you are stuck with having to produce that commodity because you are basically, running somebody else's, let's say, factory on your own farm, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. A sub point within there would be most farmers don't differentiate between a farm as a business and family as a family with its own budget. And then within the farming business, which you guys in the UK are super advanced on, relatively speaking, you are not differentiating between the wealth management business, which is the land that you own, and the operational business on that land, which is giving you yearly cash flow.
Okay.
And then, which connects to like 2 other questions we've been discussing, like if we are to be delivering ecosystem services, maybe you should be designing business models for monetizing some of those ecosystem services, which are not straightforward, and we can get it wrong, right? At the same time.
Okay.
Lots of points
there.
Yeah.
Lots of points there. I see lots of hands going up as well here. Ivo, you were next, and then I'm going to go to Benjamin Frank after that. So, Ivo, once you've made your point, please put your hand down electronically so that you can contribute later on as well for those that understand how to use the hand raising system in Zoom. So, Ivo, over to you.
Wonderful, thanks, Mark, and thank you, Matheus. I think sort of you're raising some of the most important points there. I'm co-founder and CEO of Climate Farmers. What we're doing with Climate Farmers, basically the mission we've set ourselves is to build the infrastructure for scaling regenerative agriculture. So very much in line with what we're talking about today. We have seen that a couple of years ago that there's incredible potential in scaling regenerative agriculture. And in the meantime, we have seen that it is not a matter of convincing anybody about the potential of regenerative agriculture, but it is coming into the mainstream. What we are seeing, though, is with regenerative agriculture coming into the mainstream is that it's still lacking the infrastructure to do so at all. So, and this goes to the questions. What we are seeing is farmers are very interested. They reach out to us. How do I apply regenerative practices on my farm? Often with the interest of setting up the farm for the long term. So we have identified there 3 specific target groups that are mainly interested in regenerative agriculture on the farm. That is young farmers taking over the farm from their parents. And they have the long view of how do I want the farm to be set up. I think Matheus might be a very good example of that. I'm not 100% sure. Then we have farmers that have gotten in some kind of personal or business crisis. And again, the question, how do I set up the farm on the long term? And the third, the people on the farm that are mainly doing the financial planning, which happens to be often the women in the business. And again, the question of the long term. So what we find is that those farms are most interested that have a perspective on the long term, because they see that the current system is going to work maybe short term, but the longer we do this, the less it is going to work for us. So farmers are interested if they take the long term into account. What we find though is that you might be interested, but then you still have to apply it. And you have examples in the US, you have examples in Australia, you have a few examples in Europe. But the real question, okay, how do I adapt it in my specific context, is not answered yet. And this is a system that we're setting up right now to really create the network of agricultural consultants capable of helping any farmer in any place in Europe to apply regenerative practices. Just seeing that, for example, if we're talking about arable farming, there's still very, very little in terms of consultancy available in Europe. So a big barrier up until now.
So you think one of the key pieces to overcome this is to give them the right help and the right advice and support. Okay, great.
Access to best practices and consultancy is a very big barrier that we have found.
Great.
And a lot of farmers say, "Thank you, I've seen it, I know it, I know I want to do this now. Can somebody just tell me what I'm supposed to do here?" The third point, and I make it very quick.
Very quickly.
Exactly. The point of Matthäus is financing. So the risk of a transition is too high, and we need advance payment. We need advance financing for the transition to regenerative practices. And this is where I believe a carefully designed CO2/ecosystem certificate can really help. This is something we're working on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Benjamin, over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Mark. First, to my person, my name is Benjamin Franke. I'm assistant to Ulrike Müller, who is MEP for the Renew Europe group, spokesperson on the Agri Committee, and she's shadow rapporteur for the Farm to Fork initiative report that the Parliament currently is working on. So these are questions that are keeping us busy for a long time already. Has been very interesting to listen to Matthäus and to Ivo, because they already made a lot of points that I noted for myself, and they kind of proved me right with what I wanted to say. And I want to focus on 3 points. First is public perception, because we very often see in public debates, also in policy debates, that farmers have a very negative reputation when it comes to climate, to biodiversity, to environmental protection, which obviously is not true for a vast majority of them, because they're working with nature. So what we need to do from the policy side is to help farmers have a better public perception, and also to get acknowledgement for their key role in solving these issues, rather than being seen as an obstacle to that. Second point is, and I think Matthäus has already said that in other words, that the policy approach very often takes a rather patronizing approach that puts farmers into a, well, I'd say passive or even subordinate position, degrading them to receivers of subsidies, rather than as seeing them as businessmen or women. So that leads me to the third point, which is that farmers are running businesses, and we need to be more aware for that, and we need to design policies in a way that rather creates opportunities instead of setting targets or telling farmers how to run their farms. So yeah, that's also in combination with the problem of getting finance for their businesses. Maybe I'll stop there. Maybe we can come back to these points.
Okay, good point. So some different points there about how policy treats farmers and how we could change their reputation. Music to my ears as a farmer, I have to say, especially when that's coming from a politician representative. Alberto, then I'll take Pascal and then Oliveira. So Alberto, please introduce and make your point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Alberto Arroyo Schnell, and I work for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. I have seen that in the table that you presented at the beginning, I was there as NGOs. That's
Yes.
not correct, because the International Union for Conservation of Nature actually has a lot of members who are state members. So we're a little bit of a hybrid organization, but that's okay, because in any case, what I am for sure, as I see, is the environmental voice in a way here. And therefore, I have a very important first message, if you want, that I think that is sometimes comes across maybe wrong. I don't think that we, the environmental voices, and in particular IUCN, are against farmers. I think that same as the farmers are not against the environment, of course. On the contrary, I think that we want to help. We all want to help. There are lots of challenges ahead. There is a transition needed, which is very complicated. And what we want is to be part of the solution, together with farmers, actually. That's important just to, from the very beginning, say it upfront. Now, this said, about the first question about the interest of farmers, how to ignite it. Well, I would say that it's important to send the message that there is a future here, that there is something worth transitioning and investing into. There are some changes that are clear in terms of consumer demands and markets. They are embracing sustainable food production. It's also important to note that transition into sustainable practices now is probably the best investment for the future if we want to ensure that we keep our capital. So to avoid degraded soils, the lack of water, declining biodiversity on farm, etc. Sooner or later, at the very end, everyone and everything will need to embrace this transition, because without nature, we don't have any future for agriculture or for anything else. So it's something that from the very beginning, we need to, if you want, sell from a very more positive way, if you want. It is worth doing it. It is needed. Maybe I stop here, and the next points about barriers and how to overcome all this can come later. Thanks.
Alberto, just on that point about, positive, taking this from a positive perspective, which would be, difficult to challenge in any way. What do you think are the best ways of actually doing that? What are the practical ways of best taking this as a positive move, both to the farmers and to the wider public that support the farmers?
Yes, well, there were some things mentioned before about the need to have a more positive image also of farmers. As you say, that sometimes there are challenges, which is surprising, I have to say. That should not be the case. Of course, there is a number of things that are necessary for the future, and one of the fundamental ones is the policy. I wanted to come that in the solutions bit, if you want. What the changes that we have in policies now, well, Mr. Paolo de Castro before was quite optimistic about what the results from the CAP. Yes, he also said that some people might not be that optimistic. Yes, there are some challenges there at the very moment in the current policies, but at the same time, there are still very good opportunities at the implementation level, because now member states are the ones to develop the CAP strategic plans. So there are lots of possibilities to make things happen and to make things easier, to make it attractive. Now, in terms of how to keep it positive, what you were saying before, I think that, as I was saying before, there is a need to change a little bit maybe the language that we are using. This is not a challenge to farmers. This is not an attack to farming. This is, on the contrary, a way to find solutions for a problem that we are facing, and we are going to face more and more and more, all the environmental challenges. And we need to find a way to solve this together. So this is something that you, farmers, let's say, are going to face it if you are not facing it already. How to solve it? We need everything.
All right, thank you, Alberto. Pascal, over to you.
Thank you. And first of all, my apologies, because I started on group 3 and then suddenly I was kicked out and Big Brother sent me in group 2. So sorry, I don't know what happened, but it's far beyond my control. So I'm Pascal Chapeau and I'm heading agriculture for the Nestlé Group. Briefly, I would quote and bouncing on what somebody already said, it's the long-term vision. I think farmers, they are the center, and they need to have a clear and stable vision of where we are heading to. I was discussing with a farmer last week, and he was telling me, half joking, guys, I will do whatever you want, but don't change it over time. And I think it's very important when we now link it to regenerative practices, because as you all said, it takes time to drive, to implement. It's a big change. So nobody wants, even though he sees, he has an idea that it might be good, nobody wants to take a big risk if there is not a stable and a clear vision. And I think for that, the regulator has a role to play. Any clearer, more transparent, more measurable, whatever, legal framework will only help. Because, as you said, I think the transition is probably one of the key words. It's long, and as I keep saying, even here internally, none of us would take, would change his ways of working, knowing that he will risk 30% of his salary next year or next month. To jump into that, it takes courage. So this transition phase is probably one of the keys, and this is linked with the clear and stable vision. So I think this is one of the keys, and how to overcome it. Maybe we come to it later. That can be anything, any scheme, but provided we provide this kind of reassurance for farmers, because finally they will be the ones taking most of the risk, and that cannot be that in the chain there's only one link which is taking all the risk.
So what is the value chain contribution to that? Because if different value chain players have a slightly different vision of that, then the danger is that the goalposts do change. So how does that happen from your view in Nestlé, Pascal?
From our view, first is that we would very much welcome regulation or more clearer definitions. Yeah. For instance, this regen ag is okay today. Finally, it's not like organic or even conservation agriculture. There is no clear definition, so today anybody can.
Oh, we've dropped.
Okay, about regenerative regulation around it will help. It will clean things, and it will set expectation. It will set clear expectation. And second point, I think at least at Nestlé.
Sorry, Pascal, you dropped out for about 5-6 seconds there.
Okay, I don't know what you missed.
In one sentence, can you just summarize what you said? So regulation, I think, was the key point.
I was saying regulation, and for instance, regenerative agriculture, any framework that would define it in a stricter way.
Yeah,
okay. That's absolutely welcome from our side. And last part of the answer to your question is, we do know that probably it will be more expensive, or there will be a peak, or and so be it. I think this is probably the cost to pay, and our vision is that the entire chain has to be part of it. There's no way that only one link will bear the cost, the risk, or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
And we park some money for that. Yes, we do.
Okay, great, thank you. Olivera's been waiting. Olivera, over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my idea was not to kind of have two Nestlé speakers in a row, but it seems to happen. So I'm a public affairs person from Nestlé, and I was co-organizing this fantastic dialogue, and thanks to all facilitators, moderators, and rapporteurs. So to build upon what has been said already, there were two words or two notions that were really resonating with me. First is the perception of the farmers. So indeed, I couldn't agree more that at the same time they are the biggest polluters, but now we are kind of trying to populate the idea of also farmers being the biggest carbon emissions reduction opportunity, not farmers, but farming and their practices. So this is definitely the area we have to work. But then I would also like to highlight another moment. This is the supply and demand dynamics, or supply and demand equation. recently we started to dig into the opportunity to help educate consumers to understand what is the diet that is healthy, balanced, but at the same time sustainable. And we reached out to nutritionists as interlocutors, or our, let's say, the gatekeepers towards the consumers. And the survey we have conducted, and it hasn't been published yet, has revealed really a striking element of even the contemporary nutritionists, people that have recently left the university, are completely puzzled when it comes to what does it mean healthy food choices and sustainable food choices. So not to make any negative comments, there were plenty of negative surprises where, for example, clinical nutritionists, they say for their job, it's not important to also educate consumers, in their case, those are people recovering from the illness, about the sustainable element of the nutritional choices. So just to conclude, as Pascal said, we have to work along the food supply chain. And for me, if we want to fix the supply part, let's say what farmers are supplying, we also have to think about fixing the demand part. As long as there is not significant demand for sustainably produced products, we cannot, let's say, embrace the sustainable farming to the fullest potential. I'm speaking because I'm obviously coming more from the consumer part of Nestle value chain. So I just wanted to kind of introduce the element of consumers and the need to educate them as well in parallel as we educate our farmers and our suppliers within the Nestle chain. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you know, Pascal says we need a clear vision of the direction of travel without changing the goals, but actually your point about nutritionists, one of the things you notice about nutritionists, or certainly the public promotion of nutritional work constantly changes what is perceived by the public as healthy and not healthy, and that is one of the most confusing things to try to tune into as a grower, I think. Anyway, we've got lots of people wanting to make points here. However, they're all people that have spoken already. I just wanted, you know, I know Alistair is a practicing conservation farmer and researcher, and in fact, him and I were sharing a platform last week at the UK Regen Ag event in Groundswell. Alistair, you've got a lot of insight into the practicalities of doing this. What do you think is necessary to inspire and ignite farmers to adopt these practices?
Yes, thank you, Mark. I think Matutes has said it already. The need for farmers to transition or go bust is a really driving force, and I think, you know, we are on the sharp end of this with 300 hectares of land, and where climate change is making farming incredibly challenging. Yeah. We cannot anymore be certain that harvest will eventually make it into the barn, and last year 40% of our oats did not make it to the barn at all. The year before, 0% of our crops got sown in the autumn, which is the first time in living memory that has happened. And so it's starting to make us think about how we make our farm more resilient to deal with those challenges. And the things we particularly need to look at is how we deal with soil quality and soil health so that the soil is more workable for more of the time. We need to look at how pest diseases and weeds are affected by climatic conditions and how we minimize the chances of those causing us difficulty. But we also need to keep a very close eye on how our yields perform. And I don't just say that from the perspective of delivering profit back to the farm, but if we start to do serious carbon footprinting as soon as you start to lose yield, the carbon footprint per ton of crop produced starts to go up. So there is a sweet spot where we have to optimize that. And my final point, Mark, which several other people have also alluded to, we as farmers are not just producing food, we are custodians of a whole load of ecosystem services.
Yeah.
My farm consists of the fields which I produce the food in, which I try to do in a regen ag way, but then all the rest of the ecological infrastructure, which makes up over 15% of the land mass, I need to get rewarded for delivering pollinators, for delivering biodiversity, for improving water quality, and I'm not currently rewarded for those.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Some practical points there that absolutely ring true. Okay, I think we've got Alberto here wanting to make another point. Then I'll go to you, Matheus, please.
Okay, thanks a lot. I will keep it short, but just because of the time, I think that I'm going to go to the solutions bit if you want. I have 3 points I would like to make here. First of all, it's about policy. Yes, it has been mentioned a number of times. In the EU, well, we have to work with what we get, what we have now, from last week actually. And the cap at the very moment, well, it could be much better for environment. That's something that I have to say up loudly actually. There are many approaches, and by the way, just also a clarification for Pascal about the definitions. That we have a recent publication to try to actually clarify exactly this world of definitions around sustainable agriculture. I will put the link later in the chat, but that can help. It's a mess. We understand that is what is around this, but we are trying to help also with this. Now, many approaches for sustainable agriculture have they need to have an initial investment. Yes, and at the same time anyway, in the longer run, they will get a higher return. That's the idea of making it worth it. Let's remember anyway that even nowadays, some not so sustainable or unsustainable agriculture practices are being subsidized at the very moment. So what this saying about the profitability of conventional approaches is also a little bit of a challenge here. At the very end, unsustainable practices cannot be viable forever anyway, even with subsidies. So this is about policy. The second point I will run now, I know that we don't have that much time. It's also about policy, but a little bit in the longer term. We need to think about the future. What was mentioned before about the common vision. Yes, we have a challenge. We have a number of challenges as a society. We need healthy food, affordable prices for it, and a way to ensure that everybody gets it. And we at the same time have an incredible environmental challenges. We need a way to solve all this together. And this has to be done with everybody together. And of course, farmers are fundamental here. And finally, the last point that also has been mentioned, but very important, the awareness raising, the need to ensure that we have all these targets are owned by everybody. So there is an ownership, there is a common understanding of the challenges. And for that, I think that dialogues such as this one, by the way, and the ones that we're also trying to organize in Brussels, those are fundamental. We need to start to speak the same language. Thank you very much. I stop here.
Thanks, Alberto. Okay, to the farmer in the group, or the other farmer in the group, Matheus.
Thank you, everyone. Like, amazing and incredibly rich, and also like me personally, I guess everyone else, I would love to hear from everyone. So if you haven't spoken yet, like, please do, because I'm super curious to hear your thoughts, even if you disagree, and especially if you disagree. I will limit myself to just one big point with an example. I think, like, totally agree with, I guess it was Pascal who made the point, and many others who made the point on the clarity of vision, right? Where we're going. And when you talk with an average farmer, that indeed seems to be missing, because you kind of have politics in the middle, right? Which are promising you stuff every 4 years in the Polish case. And that is very, very often based on wrong data, right? For example, the number of farmers that you have in Poland would be, accounting wise, 1.4 million. In reality, I don't think we have, 400,000 real farmers, and we should have a conversation about how many farmers do we want to have, right? Probably 10,000 is not the good, not the system that we want to go towards, and therefore we have to make changes, right? So, like, the big point is farmers are confused and are indeed seen as, or the experience is, hey, I'm getting this new regulation, I have no idea where it's coming from, I don't see the bigger picture, I don't know why that is happening, and I am being stressed and challenged, and like more and more is coming my way. from high level, let's say global and European perspective, and both of those combined, perspective seems to be super clear, right? We want to get net zero or to net zero by 2050 at the very latest. We want to reduce emissions in the European case by 55% by 2030, 50 globally by 2030. But it's not only net zero, but it's also about nature positive at the same time, right? That's why, from my perspective, we have farm to fork strategy, biodiversity strategy, many others. And like, that's like something that, really makes me think, right? We have this very clear, very ambitious strategies at the global level, yet somehow in the middle, they are not being translated and communicated in a straightforward manner. And therefore, the level of action and ambition that we, from my perspective, should be taking and the speed of those is really not aligned with those big goals. And just as a way of kind of, promoting stuff that I'm doing in that space, I will send a link to Race to Zero, which is a campaign under COP26, including for farmers to join this Race to Zero, right? And of course, I don't know how many, we are meeting here as part of the UN Food System Summit process, right? So we are clearly engaged in that discussion. But as a champion of the UN Food System Summit, I know like very, very few farmers are engaged. Which is another problem. I stop here and I'm sharing the link in the chat just now.
Fair point. I can see that in the industry as well. But there will always be the advanced farmers that are more engaged and the slower segments that catch up afterwards, I guess. I'll go to Ivo because I can see his hand up, and then I'll come. I'll go back to. I'll do ladies first in the Nestle group and go to Oliver after Ivo. Okay, so Ivo, over to you.
Thank you. I would just like to make a point towards the question of definition. I think this is probably one of the most central questions we need to solve when we're talking about mainstreaming regenerative agriculture. Is what is regenerative agriculture? What is it that we are mainstreaming here? And we have found that, and basically we are very strong proponents of a result-based definition as well. From the experience of having seen that if you implement a set of practices indiscriminately from the specific context, they are not regenerative, right? We have seen from research that it is not the practices that are regenerative. It is the application to the right context that makes them regenerative. So I believe, and I think there's solid research to back that up, that there is not a set of practices that make agriculture regenerative, but a set of results. So there are results that we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to, in absence of the correct parameters, higher ecosystem health, more carbon captured, better water availability, etc. That tell us, is regeneration taking place? And if regeneration is not taking place, we cannot call this regenerative agriculture. And I think this is an opportunity we have here in comparison to organic agriculture, where organic agriculture is basically a more, let's say, negative definition. We're saying it is organic, it is not synthetic. With regenerative agriculture, we have a positive definition. We can say it is a kind of agriculture that regenerates ecosystems. And so something that we are trying to push, and a roundtable that I already want to announce that is going to take place in the coming months, is on the question, if regenerative agriculture is an agriculture that regenerates ecosystems, which are the parameters we need to take into account there, and how do we measure them? Because if we find ways to measure remotely, scalably, the parameters that we need to take into account, we can make it give the term meaning again. Because right now it is being used a lot in this space, And we need to make sure that it has meaning, and it has meaning if we can measure it. So a lot of organic agriculture is regenerative. We can measure that, wonderful. Some of it isn't, wonderful. Some of conventional agriculture is regenerative, wonderful, we can measure that. And as a society, we should pay extra for kind of agriculture that improves the basis of our lives. And so this is a strong plaidoyer that we have in terms of the definition of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, a fair point about that definition. I think that's something that many people are trying to deal with. I'll maybe come back to you with a question. What I'm not clear on yet is exactly what this group thinks together are the main barriers. We still need to get a little bit more definition. We've got another 15-20 minutes to go before we end the session, and I want to get clearer on what these barriers are. I'm also a bit aware, I can see Olivia has put her hand down, so perhaps she doesn't want to make a point, but I'm also aware that Monica hasn't had a chance to make any point here. Monica, what are your thoughts? Maybe introduce yourself if you can. What are your thoughts on these barriers to farmers participating and how you might overcome those? You're on mute right now. Monica, you're on mute. Maybe I can't unmute you. We can't hear you.
At this moment, I think it's good.
Okay, now it's good. Now I can hear you.
Okay. Greetings from the Czech Republic. Yeah, I'm a farmer and I love it. Yeah. Basically, anyone who thinks and care about the soil can start with regenerative precision even in their garden. Yeah. Let me shortly introduce to our path to sustainable and conscious and regenerative agriculture business for as I believe it could serve as an inspiration for other farmers. Yeah. For the past 25 years, I have served as a leading farmer of Všestary Agriculture Cooperative, a cooperative that employs more than 150 people in the high season and farming on 3,000 hectares. Yeah, we are big farmers. We care about the soil and we apply regenerative agriculture. We are involved in both crop and livestock production. We are eminent producers of onions with the trademark Všestary onion, protected by the geographical indications and designations of origin. We also produce broccoli, milk, and beef. We enrich the soil we farm on with organic matter, the manure from our livestock, as it has a positive impact on soil health and fertility. It is simply the right thing to do. We farm in a culture heritage area commemorating the Battle of 1866 between Prussia and Austria, apropos sort of Austria-Waterloo. So we farm with the respect to both our history and our soil. What do we mean by the respect? Všestary Cooperative adheres to and even goes beyond the strict limits of pesticides use and maximum residues levels. For many years, we have been using precision farming technologies, strip till systems. We build hedges and other landscape features. We use drop irrigation. We have extensive experiences with organic farming, agri-envy climate measures, and insist on best animal welfare measures. No, and all of this, and many other measures, we are natural result. It is our natural result of our long-term consistent approach to the agriculture business, to do it with the utmost regard of the soil and natural that we have received from our ancestors and are obligated to pass on to our children to same rich and fruitful. This is our basic philosophy, and we believe that it is the right thing to do, the right way forward. And apparently I'm going well, I hope, because my team is very young. The average age is 32 years. No, yeah. And barriers. We care for environment, for the soil and its regeneration. However, we can only continue to do all that if we can economically sustainable. In cooperative, we put a huge emphasis on ensuring adequate standard of living of our employees. It is clear that environmental sustainability goes hand in hand with sustainability, social and economic. Therefore, I will stop arguing. I will not stop arguing that without proper funding, under a load of requirements, we will not undermine our competitiveness and will not reach economic and social sustainability. We live in a world where prohibitions and regulations precede proposals for solutions. That's wrong. That must be changed. The whole system is extremely administratively complicated. The conditions change from day to day, and therefore we definitely welcome robust advisory services. Not only to straight ecological structures, but ecological structures, but also to ensure better production, increase competitiveness, or even to help us to shorten our supply chains.
Okay. So what you're saying is, whatever happens, it must be economically sustainable. So one of the barriers here is economic sustainability. Can we achieve the level of consistency and economic output if we adopt regenerative agriculture? And there is some fear in that point. You're saying advice can help that. We don't have that advice. That's a potential barrier right now. And one of the ways that we could overcome that. And you're saying that the policy environment also is not necessarily consistent with an output-based approach to achieving the beneficial outputs of regenerative agriculture policy, and policies tend to change as well, such that you might not bet all of your farming system or cropping system on the direction of the policy approach. That's what I'm hearing, and that's also aligned with some of the things that others have said as well. I can still see Benjamin, you've had your hand up for a little while, then I'll go to Pascal after that. Benjamin, I still want to round on what these barriers are and what are the next steps.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I wanted to come back to that question actually and pick up where I left off in my previous intervention. I think that the main point really is that we need to make investments in sustainable practices economically feasible. So we need to understand farms as business models, and we need to open opportunities for farmers to really turn investments into profits in the end, and also to, in the first place, be able to invest. So that means increasing access to finance, has been mentioned before. One idea we try to float at the European Parliament is maybe using the European Investment Bank for that end. To open up and reduce the financial risk maybe a bit, but that's just one idea. The other thing is we need to connect demand better with the supply. It has been mentioned before. One thing that could play a role is better systems for labeling, for example, to really allow those consumers who have an increased willingness to pay to identify products which cater their interests in a way. So yeah, the main point is we need to take farmers seriously as businessmen, and we need to create policy in a way that allows them to run businesses and to monetize profits, to monetize investments and turn them into profits in the end.
Okay, great. Thank you, Benjamin. There's a lot of comments here on the chat as well about the need for indicators, outcome-based indicators, and the need for science. And in order to understand those indicators from science, and also how we improve the indicators through scientific and technological methods is made. So Pascal, there's quite a lot of agreement to some of the points you've already said. What other points do you have on the barriers and the next steps?
On the barrier, so on top of indicators and science and so on, I think overall this is all about change management, but also change management for something where there is still a part which is ideology. I think not. There are proof points that all this works, but not the entire world is already convinced that yes, by doing this and this and that, I will improve my soil fertility, soil structure, water retention, and all that stuff. So there is still a lack of technical certainty as well behind.
Yeah.
That's part of the risk. That's part of the risk. And that also makes that a farmer to engage probably needs more courage, because he knows that over this journey, he will have to learn to adjust, that what works in Poland will not work in Spain, and because the soil, the climate, okay, you know it much better than I do. So I think this part is still a gray area, for which we need science. And Olivera mentioned it. I just want to come back on it. The demand and others, the demand and the supply. This romantic vision that most consumers have of agriculture, happy cows, running the fields. This disconnect between the reality.
Oh, we've lost you again.
Reality and also on the longer term at that higher level, probably, because if we keep increasing the mismatch between expectation and technical reality of farming, we will always face a lot of problem.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. You see some public desire to go back to farming in the early 1900s, which has no chance of producing the amount of food that we produce now, and no chance of producing the level of quality that we have now.
Oh, yeah.
It's very interesting, that public perception. Okay, thank you, Pascal. Alistair makes a point here: whatever interpretation we choose for regenerative agricultural measures, there's always a need for farmers to be flexible. That is absolutely true, because you never know what the weather's going to throw at you. And for the last 3 years in Northern Europe, it's thrown some pretty ugly stuff. Each of my fields need managing on different ways to perform to their optimum productive and environmental potential. Rule books do not allow for that. Well, I sense very strongly from my own perspective as a farmer as well. And what works in 1 year does not necessarily work in another year in exactly the same geolocation. For me, one of the areas of science is actually unlocking some of that and trying to understand more about the interaction of soils and weather in helping people to make better decisions when you're adopting a regenerative agriculture approach. From my own experience using equipment like that behind me, the limitations to that are, the opportunity is great if you're early in dry conditions, but the limitations when it's wet are that you probably need to keep it in the shed and either adopt a slightly different approach to establishing your crops in a regenerative way, or wait until the spring. These are decisions which are not easy to take because they have big economic issues associated with them, going back to Mathilde's point about cash flow. But they need to be ones that are easier to make and easier to decide, rather than the you know, I've got 40 years of experience and I sense that this is probably the best way to do it, that we perhaps need more science behind those decisions. Olivera, back to you.
Yes, just for the sake of having it mentioned in this group, I will go back again to consumer and the demand part with the notion of true cost accounting, because I think it's really important concept to be mentioned. So we are all aware that there is the whole wealth of the entire part of the, let's say, our value chain has been built on the lowest possible price as the ultimate consumer benefit. And this I see as really as the obstacle. If throughout the decades we were kind of seeing the race for the lowest possible price of 1 kilo of potato or 1 kilo of pork meat, there I see a big issue. I really see a big issue. And this is, somebody said we have to pay extra. Indeed, we have to pay extra, but I don't know how to tackle this problem. If we want to reward farmer fairly, then we have to firstly pay fair prices. And yeah, just to conclude on this, this true cost accounting, no matter how difficult the concept in itself it is also something that has to be taken into account when, yeah, removing the barriers, or let's say, enabling the whole notion of more sustainable and more healthy food system summits, food systems. I mean, when thinking of establishing the more sustainable food systems, then we have to think also about leaving the concept of the lowest possible price for the item of food product produced.
One of the things that the system encourages right now is to focus on maximum supply, and it's very volume orientated, or right the way across the value chain. And if it's volume orientated, then at times, you know, prices crash and prices rise, but none of that takes into account any of the environmental costs. So I think that's your point. Matthias, I know you want to make another point. We've only got 5 minutes left. I want to check with Romano that he's got enough in the bank, so to speak, to make a presentation on behalf of all of us in breakout group 2. Romano,
I think so. I have a lot on what can inspire the farmers, and many barriers I think emerged. On the solution, I think is linked also very much to the barriers, so it's quite balanced. I just wanted to check what Olivera just said. Can we translate this on with the fact that farmers perhaps assess the risk of adopting new practices based more on expected yield instead of profitability? Is this the sense of what you meant with this idea of the lowest cost of food?
No, I will be very frank, but please don't write it down. I was thinking about the discounters world. You know, there is entire part of the retail chain really chasing for the lowest possible price. As long as we have this as a legitimate kind of part of our value chain, then it will be very hard for those supplying those retailers to think about the more expensive, more long-term oriented practices if they are kind of still running after the quota that they have committed to their buyers. But as I said, don't mention it, this is just the illustration. But there is the entire world that is competing to offer the lowest possible price per kilo of pork meat. This was my point.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can we perhaps on something else? I mean, many of you mentioned the shift in subsidies. Can we say that today perhaps there is a sort of let's call it perverse mechanism in incentives that need perhaps to change, or would be too much compared to what you just said?
What are your thoughts?
Would say that perverse is maybe too much to say, but misguided.
Okay, but definitely the shift from action-based to result-based is something that you all would support, correct?
Yeah, what I heard in some of this is that a much more outcome-focused approach to
Yes, indeed.
is what we are seeking. That's what I think Matus and Oliveira are making the point. I've got a comment here from Alistair. Alistair, just sorry, Matus, but we've got very few seconds left. Alistair, quickly, if you can, in 10-15 seconds, tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that we're always faced with trade-offs, and the result of that is that sometimes we have to do things which are negative for the environment to get ourselves into a position which makes us positive for productivity, or sometimes the other way around. So
at times this system needs to be forgiving because we have to correct it at points. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Matus, we got, give me 30 seconds maximum again.
Yeah, can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, all I wanted to say at the end is thank you. And we have to have those tough conversations, right? The system doesn't work in many instances. We all know that, but we somehow are super afraid to face that. And without that, we will not change, right? Yeah, so that's the biggest point I wanted to make. And like, thank you for mentioning some of those points today.
It's an entire value chain problem, and that includes the public, because to Oliveira's point, if the public are interested in the cheapest food source possible, they have to know what the cost of that is in terms of the environment. Great. Thank you, everybody, for a great session, and for, in actual fact, an hour and 10 minutes has absolutely flown by for me, and I think we've captured, Romano, some great outputs. So thank you all.
Thanks a lot.